Today's topic is accounting and the master data and transactions related to accounting. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is how to open up periods for the year. So you have to have the periods open in order to post to them. So you would go under Setup, Accounting, Manage Accounting Periods. So here you can see all the years that have been set up. In order to set up a new year, you would click on Set Up Full Year. You would click on what year you were adding. Typically it's going to be period format calendar months, but you do have other formats available. You do have, if you have a fiscal year that's July through June, for example, then you would have to decide how you wanted your period names to be named and what year it should follow. And then you have this concept of an adjustment period if you are using a 13th period, which would be the last day of your fiscal calendar. So you would go ahead and hit save. And that's as easy as it is to set up additional one whole year each month within that year. So here it is. One thing that you can do inside of a period that you may need is if you click inside of this month, you see how you have this allow non-GL changes? You would want to turn this on if you needed to do things like apply invoices to credits in closed periods. Again, it doesn't have any GL impact, but without having this flag turned on, it wouldn't let you apply documents to each other or make memo changes or examples like that. So this has to be turned on for each month that you want that to be applicable. Okay, the next thing we're going to take a look at is the general ledger accounts themselves. So here I am under my chart of accounts. The account types are set. They are NetSuite standard. You can change the name of them slightly. You shouldn't change the meaning of them, but to change the name of them, you would go to Rename Records and Transactions. Here under account type names, you could, for instance, change accounts receivable to be AR, things like that. Instead of income, you want it to be called revenue. So you can't add new account types, but you can rename to be similar. Okay, so inside of a chart of account, you see I can sort by account type. I can sort by number by clicking on the number field. I can click New to create a new account. We would recommend using numbers, so you would turn on the numbering in the accounting preferences. Here is the name of your general ledger account. Here is the parent GL account if you were using parent-child relationships for roll-up reporting. When you use these parent-childs, basically if this were a parent account, you would mark this summary box, which you see makes it inactive, which means you cannot post to that parent account. So it depends on, are you using the parent account only for roll-up reporting and you don't want people to post to it, then you would flag this as a summary account, which then would be available for reporting but would not let people use it on transaction processing. You have the type, so you would select from the list of standard account types. If I choose expense, you'll notice my fields change. So depending on what type of account it is, you may have different fields that you want to populate. So for example, the 1099 category is here on the expense account where it wasn't on there on a bank account. And what this 1099 category does is if you have a vendor and the vendor is marked as a 1099 vendor, then it looks at this general ledger account to the money that you have paid that vendor to these GL accounts, and you would associate the appropriate box. So you don't associate the 1099 category or box at the vendor level. You simply mark that vendor as 1099 reportable or not, and then at the GL account is where you would mark the appropriate box. There is some functionality to do restrictions if you needed to restrict to a specific department, class, or location. These would have to be used in conjunction with a role restriction. You would have to have the role restricted to their own department, for example, and then in that person's employee record, you would have to have a department, class, or location designated as well so that the role could restrict to the appropriate classification in the employee account. So that's it for the chart of accounts. I take that back. Actually, there is one more thing to point out. So on your chart of accounts, let's go ahead and sort by type. There are accounts that are non-posting. So those come NetSuite standard. You notice they don't have a balance off here to the right. They are things like sales orders, work orders, purchase orders. So they act more like a register, but they do show up here in your chart of accounts listing because sales orders and POs, for example, are non-posting, but they are here for you to click into, and again, it acts more like a register. So now let's go into the transactions. So first let's go to Transactions Financial. You have the option to make journal entry. Okay, so this is just your standard general ledger entry. You have, it will tell you what you're out of balance by. You cannot save it if you are out of balance. Based on this date, it will default in the appropriate posting period within the option to change the posting period if you need to. There is an accounting preference that's set up that basically determines if you are able to have a transaction date that is different than the posting period. So this can be either a hard stop or a warning or an allow. So depending on which account you're in, if you get an error, it's because of that preference. I have a reversal date and a defer entry. So if you are doing accruals, for example, you might want to take this journal entry and reverse it out on let's make this 5/1, and let's change this back to 4/14. Okay, so when I save this journal entry with just a reversal date in here, it would create the first journal entry dated 4/14 with the information down below, which I don't have anything, so I wouldn't save at this point, but and then it would also create another journal dated 5/1 with the May posting date, which would be the opposite of the journal entry that I would be saving. If I have both of these populated, both reversal date and defer entry, when I click save, it will immediately post and save this 4/14 journal entry with the information below, but it will wait until 5/1 to post the reversal of that, so the opposite entry. So it saves it as a memorized transaction and then posts it at that reversal date time. Okay, so information down below. So you have your standard chart of accounts where you can input debits, credits. So I can put in an expense. Let's say I'm doing a reclass, taking $100 out of one department, putting it into another. You notice you have a name field here as well. The name field, you can input line items on a journal to customers, vendors, or employees. And it says customer, but it also means projects. So this is a way that you can tie journal entry line items to these other entities. Okay. So there's the department. You can also tie it to class, location. You do have, for amortization, you can do amortization schedules if you needed to as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit add. There is a copy previous button, so if I wanted to copy the same GL account, I could do that, and then I would just change the department. So again, I'm just moving the money from one department to the next and hit add. So if you get an error when saving about department, class, or location, there are accounting preferences as well that let you dictate whether you want department, class, and location mandatory, as well as do you want to allow empty classifications, which means if I'm taking it out of one department, are you going to force there to be a department on the other side of the entry, or are you going to allow it to go from a department to no department? So keep this in mind if you're getting errors on the journal entry screen. Okay, so there is no concept of hold of a journal. You would basically just save and then it would be posted to the GL. So if you needed to make updates to that, you would just edit and make updates. The only way to not post something right away is if you have journal entry approvals turned on. And so if you have those approvals, then if a journal entry is in pending approval status, then it does not post until it's approved. And those approvals, a journal entry is not routed to a specific person for approval. It is role specific, which means if a role has access to approve journal entries, they could approve all journal entries. However, there are filters on the approval screen that you could use to help narrow down which journal entries maybe you should be approving versus someone else. Maybe you're in charge of one department or location and somebody else is in charge of another department or location. If this were a OneWorld account, you would also have intercompany journal entries. So intercompany journal entries allow you to post between two subsidiaries, not more than two, just two. And so it does allow you to post with two subsidiaries, and it can help you balance between those two subsidiaries. So you could produce the same result by entering two different journal entries, one for each of those subsidiaries, but it is a nice control feature on the same page to be able to look at, am I balancing between my two subsidiaries? Am I also balancing in the same subsidiary? So it does help you with that. You'll see here under Make Journal Entries, you have an import function. So there is a full import area under Setup, Import, Export, but this allows a little bit easier way to import. And so if you go to this, there is a template here, and it will walk you through basically how to do an import of journal entries. Because of course, accountants have, whether it's a payroll spreadsheet that they're getting from an outside payroll provider, they typically do have quite a few entries that they're going to be importing. So let's go back to the financial area. You have set up budgets. There is a method to copy budgets, and you can copy from actuals. If you have actuals in the system with a certain markup or discount or amount reduced. But just to go in and set up a budget, you do have the import functionality as well. If you have advanced financials, you have a concept of budget categories, which would basically be different versions of budgets. With just plain, without advanced financials, you only have one budget version per combination. You don't have multiple versions of the same budget. So here is where then you can select a budget by customer or project, item, class, department, location, or any combination. Here's where you would pick what accounts are you budgeting for. So if you're not importing these budgets, there are a couple buttons here that can make your life, a little bit easier for data entry. So if I do distribute, it will take that $100 and chop it out throughout the year. But then if I do fill for that same amount, it will then mark $100 per month. Okay. So again, I can do any combination of class, and basically I should have done this at the first, at the beginning. If I just do a couple of them. Actually, let's do income. All right, and I'm going to save. Oops. All right, and again, because I did not input that information first, it's going to wipe out everything I had. So let me redo that. And now hit save. Okay. So there you can see my 2 line items for class and location and the amounts. Let's go back. Let's take a look at the copy budgets so you can see that screen. So you can see you can do a copy from a previous budget, you can do a copy from actuals, and then you can see how you can modify by a certain percentage up or down. And then with all these checkboxes, you can either keep or get rid of class, location, department, item, and customer detail. And again, you can import off to the right here. Okay. These other features, allocation, amortization, and statistical, these are contained in advanced financials, so we're not going to cover those right now. We're going to continue on through the standard accounting transactions. So now we're going to go up into bank. So under transactions, bank, write checks. This is a place where you can write a check to, and if we go to this payee, to a customer, employee, or vendor. So that is why it's not under the payable screen, because I can pay people outside of just my vendor database. So the idea is there's no bill in the system, or there is no refund waiting to be printed for my customer, that no other documentation exists and I need to pay someone. So you have Girl Scouts show up and you buy some cookies, or you have a wire or ACH that you need to record that is not already in the system. You would use this transaction. You would date it, you would say which cash account or which bank account you wanted the money to come out of. If you wanted to print it, to print a check, you could. If you're not going to print it because it is a wire or ACH, you can just put an ACH reference number, for example. There's a memo field. If you scroll down here at the bottom, this is where you can add either an expense or just put in a GL account, or you can use an item record. So inventory item, non-inventory, service, or other charge item. If you do input an inventory item here, it will affect inventory. So most often you're going to use this for things like accounting, or sorry, you're going to come in here and use the account. You're not going to use probably the items unless you're buying like office paper or something that you do have an item record set up for. So I'm paying someone for travel expense, and I can hit add. And again, I can tie it, I can add a memo here, department, class, customer, project. I can mark it billable if this thing that I'm paying needs to eventually end up as billable to a customer. If I want to just tag it to a customer without being billable, I would just input the customer project information here. Okay, let's go ahead and save. So the GL impact will just be to my cash, and then the travel expense that I indicated down below. Let's go to the next, make deposits. So make deposits has a couple uses. So the first use would be on this payments tab. If you were using undeposited funds and you were posting your customer payments to an undeposited funds account, this would be the place where you would see all the payments from either customer payments or cash sales or customer deposits. You would see them here, and then you would want to select them and you basically move it out of undeposited into a bank account. Because up here in the header, you see that I would choose a bank account. So this is, what bank account am I affecting? If you don't have any undeposited funds here, you can go to the Other Deposits tab, which would be, here's an additional check that I'm depositing. So maybe an employee paid you back for freight. They used your shipping carrier and they owe you money. And then you have cash back. So if you wanted to record cash that you received from the bank, you could do it here as well. Okay, so that's the deposit screen. Now let's go into transfer funds. So transfer funds is a way to just transfer an amount from one bank account to another bank account. Okay, now I could do this using a journal entry, but there are a couple benefits to having this. Basically, you see how it gives me the balance. So on a journal entry, I don't see the balance when I'm doing a journal entry. It also is a different transaction type. So transfer is separate than journal entry. So if I wanted to provide access to a user to only transfers and not all journal entries, that would be easy to do. Also, it gives, because it's a different transaction type, it would be easier to report on. Okay, so then I would say how much I'm transferring. I could add a department, class, location, and hit save. And again, I could do that same thing using a journal entry and have the impact be the same, but there are a couple benefits to having it exist as a transfer instead. Oops. All right, I will do the reconciliations in a different segment. Let's go ahead and look at pay sales tax. So this is when you collect customer sales tax. So you wouldn't just cut a check, enter a vendor bill and cut a check like you would a normal utilities vendor, for example. You would have, for any sales tax that you've collected, you would see the amounts down below, and you would basically select the amount you need to pay, and it will generate a vendor bill to that tax agency. And so these are vendors that have a category of tax agency and have been collecting sales tax. You see here how I can say to be printed if you want to print it out, or if you're just recording that you paid it, via wire or whatever, you could skip the to be printed step. There are some sales tax reports. So at the very bottom under report sales tax, you do have sales tax liability by tax agency, item, sales tax on sales, analysis. Also under that same area is where you would go to print out your 1099 forms. So of course, if you don't see a vendor showing up, that should be on your 1099 forms, go make sure that the vendor has been flagged as a 1099 vendor. Also, make sure the general ledger account has that 1099 miscellaneous category selected so that it shows up in the appropriate box. Okay, now let's go take a look at the reporting. So under banking and budgeting, you have a bank register. You do have a budget reports. You have a budget income statement, budget versus actual. You have a cash statement, both summary and detail. The reconciliation will go along with the bank and credit card recs. So this is all under banking. The rest of the reports that you'll be looking for on the financial side are under the financial tab. So you have your income statement, balance sheets, comparative income statement and balance sheets, general ledger, cash flow statement, trial balance. Let's just open up a few of these. So trial balance, you do have an as of date. You have this view. Do you want to show debits and credits in different columns, or do you want to show total? Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look at chart of accounts. So this will look very similar to the same view that you have if you do list accounting accounts, just another way to get there. Okay, but then when you drill into one of these items, then you get a register. Okay. One thing to note when you go look at your bank, let's go back to the bank register report. This report will come up with the first account or the account that you have chosen in your user preferences. There is no place to edit the general ledger account, so you would come under Home, Set Preferences, and there is the Analytics tab, and here is where you would put your default bank account. So when you change that to something else and you go back to that bank register, it will show a different the bank account you've selected here. This is an important preference as well. Depending on how you want to report things, do you want basically which ones are reported by period versus a date. So this can affect what you see on reports and whether or not you want it to be by period on financials only. All reports are never. So again, this determines whether you are reporting based on period only. Are you doing it based on transaction date? So if you and another user have different selections, you may see different results as far as your filters and as far as the outcome of what your reports look like. So do make sure you come in here and understand how you want to use this preference. So let's go back to the reports. Transaction detail will show every posting transaction. Okay. By account, it does show you the split, which would be the other side of the entry. So a lot of times you'll come in here if somebody wants to just see deposits. Maybe you'll edit this, add a filter on it to only show deposits. So it's a very easy report to take a look at, but you can obviously filter and group it differently so that it's more user-friendly and maybe not just this row view like you're seeing here. We will have another session on financial statements, and NetSuite has some great videos on customizing financial statements. But financial statements, you are able to edit the layout. So edit layout is something that's only for financial statements. And basically you can redefine what's in the income bucket or what's in the expense bucket. So if we look at expense, for example, its definition of expense is any account type that is expense. But if you wanted to break it out into, operational expense versus administrative expense, you could then add new rows and sections and then define what should belong. And anytime, just for your reference, anytime that you customize any report, you can't overwrite the standard report. It automatically puts the word custom in front of it, which then you can change to be whatever you want, and then you can save. So again, you can never overwrite the standard, so it's always safe to customize. And you always have both detail and summary. And you can always go back and forth between detail and summary with this View Detail button. So this would be the detail of the overall income statement, as opposed to if you click here and view the detail, you're only going to see the detail of that $161. All right, that's it for the general accounting.